This episode is brought to you by SS&C Mineralware. Are you managing mineral assets and feeling overwhelmed? Unsure if you're getting paid what you're owed? SS&C Mineralware is here to simplify the management of your minerals, royalties, and non-operated working interests. Mineralware's out-of-the-box features give you the tools you need to visualize and keep track of all of your assets in one place. Mineralware lets you know in seconds where your interests are, what's active, what acreage is open for lease, and if you're getting paid what you're owed. With Mineralware, you can even automate your revenue and JIB processing and eliminate tedious manual data entry, allowing you to focus on more pressing issues. Thousands of mineral owners rely on Mineralware to keep their mineral management simple, automatic, and all in one place. Take control of your mineral assets today with SS&C Mineralware. To see a demo, you can visit their website at www.mineralware.com. That's mineralware.com.
Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And in this episode, we're going to cover listener questions for March of 2026 and, some, I guess, pretty average or normal type of questions that we often get, but some, like as always, like we always say, there's a little bit of a twist to each of these. And so the important part is in the nuance. And so we'll try to cover that, to the extent we can with a 1 or 2 sentence question. But what do you think, Justin, about these questions this month?
It's, flavors that we hear quite a bit. Like you say, there's always some nuance to these that could apply to folks. That's why we like to talk about them. But these are pretty typical questions for the most part, but interesting and something to learn nonetheless.
Yeah. And, I think that's the important thing to take away here is that these issues that we're going to be talking about today impact every mineral and royalty owner at some stage or another, right? So depending on where you are in your journey, you may be dealing with these types of issues right now and can learn from hopefully the answer that we provide. And if not, it'd be something that you can file away and, remember, I remember they answered that question in, March of 2026, pull up that episode, listen to it. So when you are dealing with that situation, you have some tips and some guidance, hopefully to set you on the right path. So with that, Justin, do you want to dive into this first one?
All right, this first one is from Greg, and this was actually meant to be part of our February episode, but we had stopped for time constraint. Greg asked, we have 2 producing wells in LaSalle County, Texas. EOG is the operator. They spudded in 3 more wells 2 years ago, but haven't drilled. Are they waiting for prices to go up? So this is a pretty common question, Matt. And we saw, I guess a couple of years ago, there was a really high what they call DUC, drilled uncompleted well inventory, that's been slowly depleted. But that seems to be part of the game that they're playing with, ensuring that they're staying within cash flow, is to have those wells ready to drill and then allocate that capital only when it makes sense for them to do so.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Greg, without diving into the details, it's hard to say exactly what they're waiting for. I think that you mentioned that they spudded in 3 more wells, and that means that they started to drill. So like Justin indicated, that indicates to me that there may be drilled but uncompleted wells. And like Justin mentioned, it's very common for them to drill the well and they might wait 6 months, 12 months. And a lot of that's more operational than it is dependent on waiting for a specific price and trying to time when they, turn in line those wells. I would say that's not a common practice, especially for a larger operator like EOG. They have hedged a fair amount of their production. When they go ahead and approve and start to drill, they're committed, right? And so they're going to go ahead and finish that operation. But oftentimes it's because they're waiting to have enough wells in inventory that they can get a frac crew to come and complete those in a continuous fashion so that they don't have to hire the crew and then send them off to another job or another operator and then try to get them back, which is often hard, to do. So usually what operators will do is if they're running multiple rigs, they wait till they have enough wells that have been drilled that they can then send in the frac crew to go and complete those wells, pad by pad, and keep that frac crew busy for like a full year. And so oftentimes it's more operational reasons like that they might wait to complete the well and to start producing if they've started drilling or if they've spudded the well, like you indicated, and drilled it. So that's probably what's happening rather than it is timing prices. And so by the time you are listening to this, hopefully they've completed that well and you're starting to receive royalties. But yeah, that's generally what they try to do.
Our next one here is from James, kind of a similar, different flavor. I have 5 natural gas wells that are capped off. Why would a gas company still pay me royalties? Matt, well, the royalties are nice. I'm sure this can be both operational or a case of something else going on.
Yeah, it's hard to say without knowing the exact well names or API numbers where we could look up the wells. It's possible that you're getting royalties on other wells that maybe you don't know about. Be good to cross-reference those 5 wells that you know about against the State Oil and Gas Commission website to look at the status, and maybe one of those is still producing, or there's some other answer out there that perhaps you're again, because you're receiving royalties a couple of months after production, that maybe if they just plug the well, it'll take a couple of months before that reflects in your revenue statements, and that well will stop paying you royalties. Although at the same rate, if it must be a very marginal producer if they're still paying royalties, and they're looking at capping those off. So, or plugging and abandoning is the technical term that's used. So there's something else going on there, James. I think you're probably getting paid on another well that isn't one of those 5 that have been plugged and abandoned, because of course, by definition, if they've been capped or plugged, they fill the wellbore with cement, they take off the wellhead, it's no longer capable of producing. And so you wouldn't see any royalties from that point forward. So probably something else going on, but hard to say without more information.
Our next one, Matt, is from Greg. This is a very common situation that we hear about. Greg says, my father was an engineer who invested in mineral rights, then passed away in January 2024. First of all, very sorry for the passing. With his passing went all the knowledge and the details of these assets and the knowledge and guidance of what to do with them. My mother now has mineral right assets, and she and I do not understand what we own, how much the assets are worth, or what to do with them. We're getting offers on a regular basis that seem grossly undervalued compared to the payouts that they're giving. Another pain point is she has to pay property taxes on some of the assets, and we don't really understand this. Hoping for a little advice, perhaps a particular episode of your podcast, or any other very basic information. He also suggests a book or Mineral Rights 101. And Matt, thankfully, you have an answer, which is your Mineral Rights course, which is wonderful, and it kind of takes you from the ground level where you are, Greg, into understanding what is this asset and the fundamentals of managing the asset.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I guess it's a shameless plug here that my mineral management basics course is basically designed to answer those questions you're facing, Greg. If you're worried about making mistakes because, you maybe think you're leaving money on the table just because you don't quite understand what you own or how to properly manage them. And in that course that Justin mentions, which you can find at mineralrightspodcast.com and /courses, or you can just go to the website and then click on the courses tab, and it'll take you to the course information. And basically in that course, I walk you step by step through the process of finding out exactly what you own and where it's located. So in other words, performing a title search, getting copies of all the important documents. I have checklists in there that help you along the way. There's short videos, and it basically just gives you examples and step-by-step instructions to, again, locate those interests and then be able to find them on a map and to find out what type of oil and gas activity is going on your interests or nearby, so you can understand the relative value. And, hopefully taking that course, it'll help answer some of those questions about, why you're getting those offers. And, generally speaking, is this a desirable asset because of the amount of activity that's going on, or is it kind of away from everything? And those are just more speculative type offers. And then also, just understand the property tax side of things, which we don't dive into in great detail in the course, but, understanding that, the types of interests that you own, and then that'll fit into, if you're getting paid royalties in Texas, for example, you have to pay property taxes on the royalties from that prior year. And, that's all something that goes with owning these types of assets, for the good or bad, I guess. But in general, that's why that course was designed. I've thought about writing a book, and maybe someday I will, in terms of Mineral Rights 101 or mineral management. But that course is really designed to answer those questions, take you step by step. You have lifetime access to it. So if you, are like, oh, I need to find more information about this one particular property, I can't remember, how do I document that in a run sheet, or how do I do a title search? You can go back and watch those videos. So once you buy it, then you have lifetime access. So hopefully that helps. Again, that's probably where I would start. We have episodes on how to perform a title search, which I believe was episode 6. So that's a great place to start to get a handle on the deeds and the leases and start to get an inventory of what you own, which is probably the first step. And then from there, if you want to dive deeper, you can take that course and it'll walk you through everything. So good luck. And again, our condolences on the passing of your dad.
Next up here is Sarah. Sarah says, I'm working with some folks who have a significant number of deeds with an address that will be changing. Would love to hear if you had a podcast that discusses best practice for this. Do you only change on lease? Is there a standard form that can be filled in with the counties? It will be fairly straightforward to contact their operators, but wondering if you had more information or guidance on the actual address on a deed being outdated. Thanks, and looking forward to hearing from you. And Matt, this is something that, very routine. Happens very often, and there's a few different options. Something that's worth talking to an attorney about, though, to make sure that you're aware of what each state wants, what each county might want, and that whatever you're filing is correctly worded and all those things.
Yeah, that's just right. And actually, we just covered this in a recent episode, Sarah. So, I know it's taken a couple of months between when your question was asked and we're answering it here, but that was episode 322. Just a few episodes ago, where we talked about how landmen track down mineral owners and then what you can do to help them. And actually, in that episode, there's a link to a free affidavit of change of address form that I put together that you can use to review with your attorney and then file in the county or counties where your minerals are located. Like Sarah's dealing with her clients is, they have non-producing minerals. And that's generally, I would say, when this is most useful, because generally if you are dealing with an operator, you'll let them know when you have a change of address, and that each operator will have a change of address form or a way that they want you to notify them of that so that they can send the royalty checks and the revenue statements to the right address and the tax forms as well at the end of the year. And so obviously if you're getting paid royalties, that's sort of normal business to keep that operator up to date when you move. But if you have not leased those properties and they're sitting out there for years, and usually that's where this becomes the biggest issue, is if you're wanting to get notified as soon as somebody wants to lease those minerals, well, you want to make it easier for the landman to find you so that they can lease those and they know how to get a hold of you. And that's where that affidavit of a change of address form and filing it with the county becomes useful. And particularly if the address on the deed is different than your current address. If your address is the same, even if it's been 10 or 20 years and you live at the same address as what's reflected on the deed, then that's, you don't obviously need to really do anything. They'll pull that deed of record and see that you're the owner of record and then say, oh yeah, this is their address. We'll send the lease offer that way and then you'll get it. The issue becomes if you moved, a couple of times since then and or maybe changed names, if you're, maybe the deed is under your maiden name and your old address and you've changed names, it may be harder for them to find you. And that's where this form can become particularly useful. So anyway, that's how you find it. Episode 322, click the link to get access to that free change of address form. And as always, like we always say, and these important matters when you're filing something with the county, an official record, then, get with an attorney to make sure you're doing everything properly. So hope that helps.
All right, Matt. So our next one is an interesting one, and he's asking the right questions. George is asking about appraisals, and what he's looking to do is find a way that the IRS will accept an appraisal. And in his situation, his income is approximately $7,000 a year from these royalties. And Matt, we often talk about the fact that you do appraisals, and there's many others in the industry that do appraisals. However, these can be very expensive due to how complex it is to do this and how specialized the knowledge is. George mentions that, he saw prices anywhere between $8,000 to $20,000, which, doesn't really make sense in the situation where you're making less than $10,000 a year from royalties. So his question is, what are some other ways that satisfy the IRS in terms of ways to evaluate the value of your minerals? This would be different in a situation where you're dealing with IRS versus selling, just because there are two different situations and two different bars that you have to meet.
Yeah, that's right. And so the question really is the triggering event that, caused George to go down this path was, unfortunately, his mother passed away. So our condolences again on the passing of your mother. And so he was dealing with her estate. And then he needs an appraisal for the probate court and for the IRS for the purposes of making sure that, if there's any estate taxes due, et cetera. And, with that whole formal process, typically you do need to get an appraisal, a formal appraisal that is per US PAP. That's US appraisal practices, basically, that says that these are the standard things that need to be in the appraisal and the things that need to be considered. And the whole thing with that is that it's very time consuming. And the report is, 50-page report. It has all kinds of documentation in there so that somebody could independently recreate that valuation and come up with a similar answer. So it has to be a very robust appraisal. And that's why, in doing your research, George, you found that those can cost between, say, $8 to $10 to $20,000 and upwards if you have a significant number of properties. Unfortunately, there's no real way around it if you need a formal IRS appraisal. It's just that's what it takes to do that. Like Justin indicated, if you just needed to know roughly what the asset's worth, one of the things that he mentions in here is in Oklahoma, that's where these assets are located. The Oklahoma Department of Human Services mentioned something about just doing a multiple of cash flow for annual royalties and using that as the method to, use that for Medicaid. Again, that can be tricky. And that could work if everything is fully developed and the wells are more than 5 years old, then a multiple of cash flow might get you in the ballpark. But unfortunately, in the case here, because I ended up, doing a deeper dive on this, and there's, undeveloped acreage, right? So the producing well is a portion of the value. In this case, a small percentage of the value. And then the majority of the value is actually in the undeveloped acreage, which you really cannot assess using a multiple of cash flow. And so you have to do an appraisal or a discounted cash flow analysis to estimate what the future royalty stream would be and then discount that back to a certain date. In this case, the date of death from an IRS perspective, and then use that to come up with the total value of the property. And so unfortunately, George, there's really no way around that from an IRS perspective. If you need a formal appraisal that you feel like would withstand an audit. And so that's important. There's a level of risk, and obviously having a conversation with your CPA is the first step in finding out what they recommend and then going down that path. You take on risk if you don't get an appraisal, and if you use some other valuation method and they audit you and they disagree, then you could be faced with penalties and additional taxes if you get it wrong. So, there's a risk with it. It is what it is. In this case, you're getting $7,000 a year approximately, let's say, from the producing well, but with the significant value above that from undeveloped acreage, and to where it maybe does make sense to get a formal appraisal, even if the cash flow on an annual basis maybe seems low, but if they drill a couple of additional wells, that'll go way up. And so, spending the money, it's obviously a decision on what you want to do from that standpoint. But at the end of the day, your attorney, your state attorney, and your CPA will have some recommendations on what they need to properly file those documents. And oftentimes getting a formal appraisal is required. And that is something I do for clients, and, happy to help anyone that needs a cost estimate or just to understand, what that would entail. And like Justin mentioned, there's other skilled people out there that do this work as well. And I think, my experience, we all kind of generally will be in the ballpark when you go and get quotes from different people, as far as how much it's going to cost. And, if anyone needs help with that, I offer free consultations. And if you go to my website, silverheelsinvestments.com, that's Silver Heels, HEELS, investments.com. And there's a link on there where you can schedule a free 30-minute consultation. So great to hear from you, George, and hope all is well.
Our next one here is from Deborah, and I thought the way she asked this is pretty interesting. Deborah says, how do I get a deed and title for our inherited mineral rights in Eddy County, New Mexico? They provided a deed of distribution. Do we need a deed to get clear title to sell? And Matt, it's always good to have the deed, first of all. However, typically in that situation, the buyer is going to be doing title work on this. So I'm not sure that having a deed in hand is really necessarily always required. It really depends who's going to be doing the title work. If the buyer is willing to do that or not, but typically they're going to, have that as part of the investment, and they know that's going to be part of the deal.
Yeah, and when you say a deed of distribution, that indicated to me that you got title to those assets, and so in that situation, Deborah, you would be good, right? You'd have, assuming there are no title defects, and like Justin mentioned, if you do sell, they're going to do the title work and understand if there's some sort of a cloud in the chain of title from a previous instrument out there that's ambiguous, or maybe something wasn't transferred properly. But from your standpoint, from assuming the person that you inherited the minerals from had clear and marketable title through that whole estate, going through probate and getting the deed of distribution and getting that in your name, you basically are good to go. And if you looking to sell, you should be okay. But again, that whole title process, the title review that the buyer will do as part of their due diligence will reveal if there's something else. And then, like Justin mentioned, I think in Eddy County, you have a lot of sway and influence to say, well, that's part of if there is something that's on the buyer to clear and to pay for, they'll prepare the documents. You may need to sign some things, but have them work with their title attorney to get it filed and stuff like that, instead of you having to pay the $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 to clear a potential title issue. If you're looking at selling, have that as part of the buyer's responsibility. So especially in Eddy County, New Mexico, where it's a super hot market, very desirable area to own minerals. So hope that helps, Deborah, and good luck with everything.
One more thing to mention, Matt, is if that deed of distribution isn't recorded in Eddy County, that's certainly a step you should take, Deborah, to ensure that that is filed and recorded in Eddy County, New Mexico.
Absolutely.
Our last one here from Martha. We've got royalty checks from Ontario Resources. We need deeds. West Virginia Tyler County Clerk gave me the name of 3 attorneys to do title searches. None have responded. And Matt, I can imagine, West Virginia has kind of new activity coming up there. There's new interest. The activity is growing there. And so it doesn't seem terribly surprising that there's not a super robust industry of attorneys and those kinds of things, as if you're calling in Midland, Texas. But any advice here? I'm not sure even if Tyler County would have documents online.
Yeah, that's the first step, would be to search that and see if the county clerk has those instruments that you can search online. Oftentimes they are, particularly in, areas where there's a lot of oil and gas activity. They're starting to digitize those and make them available to, I think, lighten the burden on the staff that work in those offices. So that'd be the first step. If it's not available online, you may need to hire a landman to go, or you can go yourself to the county courthouse and do the search. And again, listen to episode 6, which is where we talk about how to perform a title search. If you want more step-by-step instruction and copies of like run sheet templates and other checklists of the documents that you need to have, again, go back to my Mineral Management Basics course, which you can find at mineralrightspodcast.com/courses. And so that would be the first step. And Martha, you can absolutely do that title search on your own to get copies of those deeds if you just need the, last couple of deeds in that chain of title and, the names to look for. It's a pretty straightforward exercise. And particularly if you are getting royalty checks from Ontario Resources, that indicates that you are in pay status and that everything is probably clear from a title perspective. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be paying you. And if you're just looking to get copies of that documentation for your records, then, it's probably something worth trying on your own and seeing if you could find that. And, if push comes to shove and you need to go there and do that in person, maybe that's something you could plan as part of some other travel and swing by there and visit relatives and do some other things while you're in town, and then go into the county clerk, and they can help you as well with what books to look in and what to look for, and you can explain your situation and the names and how you need to do that, and they can help that. And again, in my course, I talk about going to the physical county courthouse and give you some examples of what those books look like and how to do the search in those books and some different ways to go about that. So hope that helps, and good luck. Also, it's worth asking the operator as well, Matt. You can absolutely ask the operator if they would mind providing the deeds. If they're paying you, they've likely already done this title work. Sometimes if they have access to those documents, they are happy to provide them. And then other companies are less willing to provide them, or they work with a third party that may actually have the record. So worth the ask, Martha, though, in that situation. Yeah, and that's a great point. And what you would be specifically asking for is a redacted copy of the title opinion just related to your interest. And so oftentimes operators will provide that, and it'll list out, your legal description and the names and, et cetera. And so that's something that's great to have, because that gives you insight into that chain of title without having to go through the time and effort of doing a title search on your own. So absolutely worth asking for. They might say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So, all right. Well, that wraps up this month's listener questions episode. Some, as always, some, nuanced takes on very common situations. And hopefully this is helpful no matter where you are in your journey if you're dealing with these types of situations. And as always, you can find links to the resources we mentioned at mineralrightspodcast.com, and we'll have some sections on these different themes. And so I'll have links of all the episodes that we've covered. And so you can use that as a little bit of a resource as well. And as always, if you want more insight into these questions that we talked about today. I have a weekly newsletter that I send out on Fridays. You can sign up for that for free on my website at mineralrightspodcast.com. So thanks again for listening. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.